Hello and welcome to Middle East Matters. I'm Delano D'Souza filling in for Sanam Shantier. Coming up this week, anger mounts in Iraq after a fire ripped through a COVID-19 hospital in the south. It's the second time such an incident has happened within the country in a matter of months. Medicine shortages, fuel shortages, and endless power cuts. We speak to one NGO in Lebanon to find out how people are coping. And a victory for gay rights in Israel after the country's Supreme Court annuls a surrogacy law which excluded same-sex couples. But first, local authorities in the southern Iraqi city of Nasiriyah are being blamed for negligence. This after a fire ripped through a coronavirus unit in a hospital on Monday. Now, according to an initial investigation, sparks from faulty wiring spread to an oxygen tank, which later exploded. A similar fire broke out at a COVID-19 facility in Baghdad in April.
The flames had barely been extinguished when protesters gathered outside Al-Hussein Hospital in the southern city of Nasiriyah. Crowds chanted the revolution will take place and burned tires in front of the mayor's office. They accuse authorities of corruption and neglect after a fire in the hospital's COVID ward, believed to be sparked by an exploding oxygen tank, trapped dozens of people inside.
This catastrophe has left me speechless. It looks like Iraq is destined to suffer anguish and calamities.
The Prime Minister suspended the hospital's director, along with the city's health and civil defense managers. But it's not enough to quell the anger of Iraqis. The tragedy comes just 2.5 months after another fire on a COVID ward in Baghdad killed over 80 people. Sparked by the explosion of poorly stored oxygen tanks, it led to widespread anger and the resignation of Iraq's health minister. This time, hopelessness has set in.
The whole state system has collapsed, and who has paid the price? The people inside here. We don't know what to do. When we protested, they called us mobs. They said we were members of political parties. They called us corrupt. What else can we do? May God find us a solution.
Decades of war and corruption have left Iraq's healthcare system completely run down. The country has struggled to contain the coronavirus and is currently in the middle of a new surge in cases.
To the Iraqi city of Mosul next, where in 2014, the Islamic State group leader announced the formation of the group's caliphate at the Al-Nuri mosque. 3 years later, the jihadists destroyed the mosque and its famous leaning minaret. Since the end of the war, the United Arab Emirates pledged $50 million to rebuild the monument, which was first constructed in 1172. Jack Hewson reports.
The Al-Nuri Mosque and its leaning minaret dominated Mosul's skyline for centuries, but its longevity was cut short by the Islamic State group, which blew it up in 2017 in the last days of the Battle of Mosul. Today, the 4th anniversary of the city's liberation, all that remains is the mosque's green dome and the minaret's base. Omar Taka of UNESCO says the clearance has been painstaking.
One of the most difficulties that we faced here in the site was removing the rubble. We removed about 5,600 tons of rubble from the prayer hall and from the minaret. And also we removed about 20 IEDs, some of them was still active, and ISIS put some of the bombs inside the walls.
The mosque is being rebuilt as part of a $50 million project funded by the UAE. These workmen are excavating the minaret base to look for artifacts and to stabilize the foundation.
In the spirit of resilience that this project embodies, authorities in Mosul have recovered more than 44,000 bricks from the old town that they're going to use to rebuild Al-Nuri's iconic leaning minaret. And it's worth noting that the new minaret will be just as leaning and tilted as the original.
But the new site design, which was selected by an international jury in a global competition, is a point of controversy. Critics like Moslawi architect Muqtad Jamil have objected, saying it is not in keeping with local style and that secondary buildings, including a school and cultural centre, will obscure views of the minaret.
The people of Mosul want the minaret and the mosque itself as they were before. The people don't care about the school and the new buildings in that location. The mistake that has been made here is the responsibility of the Sunni Endowment and UNESCO.
Other local people France 24 spoke to also objected to a restricted view of the mosque site. And with much of the city still in ruins, some said they were frustrated at the slow pace of reconstruction.
Pharmacies in Lebanon have gone on an indefinite strike. Drug importers have warned they are running out of hundreds of drugs as the country's central bank has failed to pay overseas suppliers millions of dollars in dues. This, coupled with fuel shortages and power cuts, which can last up to 22 hours a day, has resulted in the situation in Lebanon going from bad to worse. Haddak Men B3id is an organization on the ground which aims to end food insecurity. We can now go across to its co-founder, Gaelle Matar, in Beirut. Gaelle, thank you very much for joining us once again here on Middle East Matters. How have things changed since we spoke last year?
Yeah, so definitely the situation in Lebanon has gotten really worse from last year till this year. I can say that the situation is that of a horrific violation of human rights. Specifically, I would say the human right to freedom. For example, in Lebanon, nowadays we are slaves to a system that is humiliating us on a daily basis. For example, people are waiting in lines for hours and hours on gas stations because of the fuel shortages. People are begging pharmacies for them to have their chronic and life-saving medications. And we in Lebanon as well are worrying on a daily basis whether how we're going to get by our day because we have little to no electricity or even water. So you can imagine how tragic the situation is for Lebanon. And I can speak as well for Haddak Men B3id, specifically from last year till this year. A lot of the people who were actually donors, who were supporting us with our mission, are now beneficiaries, are now families requiring our assistance. So you can imagine how drastic this has become for Lebanon and for the people.
Gaelle, is your organization getting the funding it needs? Because as you said, people are dealing with so much at one time, fuel shortages, medicine shortages, etc.
Yeah, so definitely the donations have decreased from last year up until this year. We are struggling to find donations or to secure donations, especially because we rely on people, solely on people, to donate either food items or monetary organizations. And this is why currently we are definitely relying on the diaspora community or the community abroad to support the people of Lebanon, because the local people in Lebanon are barely making it through.
And where are you getting the food which you distribute to people?
Yes, we are getting the food from suppliers that we, usually are getting the food from. So this is how we are getting our food. But definitely, I can say we are struggling in shortages and in, food insecurity. I can give one example. For example, food items, especially cooking oil and meat, have registered skyrocketing prices from last year till this year. And many families in Lebanon are substituting cooking oil for water and are removing meat altogether from their meal plans.
Last year when we spoke, you told me you wanted to remain in Lebanon and help bring about change. You spoke about that resilient Lebanese spirit. Do you still feel that way?
Honestly, I can tell you that the people in Lebanon have had enough. This year, the people in Lebanon are feeling really helpless. And I can speak from myself that definitely I am feeling a bit helpless, but I can, because you brought it up, Delano, it's very important to say that nowadays we are needed much more than before. So the fact that my community needs me and needs my friends and the people who are helping us, this thing allows me to remain a bit optimistic, a bit hopeful, to remain lending a helping hand for the people in Lebanon. So especially now, I am obliged to feel a bit hopeful and helpful for my community.
Gaelle, the fact that you feel hopeful in this time is really a testament. Good luck to you and your organization, Haddak Men B3id. Thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you, Delano.
Next, to a major victory for same-sex couples in Israel. The country's Supreme Court ruling gay couples can have children through surrogates. Restrictions currently in place need to be lifted within the next 6 months. The court's decision is a result of a legal battle which has lasted a decade.
For Itai and Yoav, it's vindication after over a decade of legal obstacles. Israel's Supreme Court has finally ruled same-sex couples can use surrogates to start a family.
We filed a petition, and here we are 12 years later. We did open the door and made the breakthrough for thousands, maybe tens of thousands of couples here in Israel, but it's not only the people that will benefit directly from this process and this result, but I believe that any step forward to equality is good for everybody.
Itai and Yoav had their 3 daughters through surrogates abroad. To date, the only option for same-sex couples and single men in Israel. The practice, where a woman agrees to bear a child for others, was first legalized there in 1996 and later expanded to single women, though same-sex couples weren't included, despite Israel's leading place in the Middle East when it comes to LGBTQ rights. The Supreme Court ordered lawmakers to end such discrimination last year, calling it unconstitutional, though ultra-conservatives in Parliament blocked any movement on the issue. Now, the court said restrictions have to go within 6 months, to the joy of Israel's LGBTQ community and openly gay politicians.
The right to equality and the right to parenthood have found their appropriate place when it comes to the critical issue of forming a family. Discrimination against same-sex couples and single fathers will end.
Even so, there's still likely to be opposition in Parliament, where conservative and religious politicians have been vocal about the damage they think the concept will do to Israel and its people.
Now, it already has the world's tallest building, and now Dubai has become home to the world's deepest pool. The indoor pool at Deep Dive Dubai is nearly 200 feet or 60 meters deep. The vertical pool resembles a sunken city, which divers can discover on their own or with a guide. People 10 and older can explore the pool, which contains 3.7 million gallons of water. That's it for this edition of Middle East Matters. From all of us on the team, thank you very much for watching.